So my name's Elias Rivera. My official title is I'm a structural engineer um, at my company, and I've been doing this for about 8.5 years. Feels like a longer time, but I mean, since I started school, it's been 8.5 years. I mean, as you know, most viewers may be aware, there's so many different kinds of engineering, and structural engineering falls within the umbrella of civil engineering. Um, So when you're a freshman, you're deciding what you're going to be taking in school. They present with you mechanical slash aerospace or electrical and then civil. But within civil, there's so many different disciplines, and structural is one of them. And we primarily focus on the the structural systems. So basically, the skeleton of a structure or a building or a bridge. We're making sure that the weights and forces from the environment are being transferred down to the foundation in a safe manner. Um, so that's the you know more or less in a nutshell what structural engineering is. We work with other civil engineers that have other specialties or other experience, such as geotech engineers that are responsible for making sure the earth, um, where we're going to put our foundations, um, that's safe, or where the interaction between the foundations and the soil is safe. We work with site civil engineers to make sure the drainage and the grading are done properly and well coordinated with our structure. And there's also all sorts of other civil engineers depending on what industry we work in. Um, but essentially, that's what a structural engineer is. And there's so many different kinds of industries that an structural engineer could be working in. Um, I had no idea how many there were until after I started working and realized like the breadth of um, how many different paths a structural engineer could go. I see my job primarily as an office job. We do get some field um, opportunities, and I say opportunities because I look forward to going to the field, being the construction site. Um, However, that's more like 10% of my time, maybe even less than that. For the most part, I'm in the office, and they tell you this in school, and you kind of like, okay, yeah, this is going to be important. But in school, you're so bogged down with all the math and all the classes you have to take to actually learn the material and be able to do design or analysis. But like most of my job is writing emails, on phone calls, and meetings. And mind you, this is more of 8.5 years in my industry. That's what I'm doing. Um, I'm responsible. I am the lead engineer on most of the projects I'm working on. Um, and they go from anywhere from small scopes projects, anywhere from tens of thousands of dollars to um, sometimes over millions of dollars, depending on the client and what we're doing. But my role as a structural engineer here at my company is usually part of a team of other engineers, and we're all working together. We're all doing the project in house. So sometimes we have our in-house contractors that are building the stuff. The structures are themselves. So our company's doing all the work or most of the work. Um, but let's say on the design side, we're constantly coordinating from the beginning of the project. What is the scope? What are the issues that we're foreseeing? What does the client really want? And how we could save the client as much money as we can, in our procedures or construction or our approach. So yeah, so typically it's a lot of coordinating and then a lot of task management. So it's basically within my field at my company, I'm not considered a project manager, but I'm basically managing the project for the structural component of it and making sure I'm well coordinated with the other disciplines or the other players involved, the financial side, and the other disciplines, the architects. Um, this we may get to this later, but I don't do bridges. Our company does design bridges from the structural standpoint, but that's a different department. We're primarily working on buildings and infrastructure in the water and wastewater side. So, in a nutshell, that's what I'm doing. I'm constantly on calls, constantly writing emails and making sure that the people above me, the people that are more experienced, or the people that are making directly talking to the client, are satisfied, and the people that I'm passing the work on or are delegating the work are have a good understanding of what they need to do and when they need to do it and how long it should take them to do it. You definitely need a bachelor's degree in civil engineering. Um, Depending on the different university, there might be a little technicality. There's a architectural engineering undergrad. I'm not too familiar with that, but I know some schools offer that, and essentially is a civil engineering degree, from what I understand, with a more um, focus on structural. Um, so I most programs that I've come across, and especially the ones I've where I went to school, only offered a civil undergrad, which is the standard. Um, and they started telling me in school right around the time that I was still, a sophomore, junior, that basically most companies are requiring you to have a master's in structural engineering. And it's not and at the time, um, it wasn't, the reason was not because the market was not doing so well. Well, in that time, it actually wasn't doing so well, but it was mainly because um, with an undergrad degree in civil engineering, earlier I mentioned there's the whole breadth of disciplines of different kinds of engineering within civil. So when a university is trying to give you a civil degree, they want to give you expose you to all the different kinds of primary disciplines that are available out there that you for the different paths you could take as a civil engineering um, student. However, so basically, just to get my civil degree, I was only able to take I was required to take 2 structural classes and then maybe another 1 or 2 elective. But besides that, that's all I got for the structural side. And with I'm going to spare you the details of all the different kinds of um, issues you could come across in as a structural engineer in the different industries. So, long story short, there's a lot of classes. Um, as a structural engineer, the best thing you could do is take as many classes as possible in structural engineering, as far as analysis, design. There's different kinds of materials, like there's steel, there's concrete, there's timber, wood, there's masonry, aluminum. So there's a lot of different materials that we do analysis and design in. And all these classes have like the basic classes, then the advanced classes, and even more advanced classes, especially steel and concrete when you go to grad school. So if I'm an engineering boss and I want to hire someone that's ready to do analysis work um, and do design, I want someone that has a master's degree, because I know for sure they'll have been exposed to the more advanced classes that that we require. And mind you, like depending on where you start working, you may, people understand you're just out of school. You're still a learning curve of what you're doing in that particular industry, that particular office. Um, but I will throw in this caveat that this is not the golden rule. You don't have to absolutely get a master's. Depending on where someone did the internship, or someone, if you have any connections, or or if your undergrad courses were very heavy with structural courses, um, there may be a situation where you could get a job in a structural group and not need to have a master's right away. They may encourage you to get one while you're already working. But the boss that hired me, mind you, he got hired back in the late 80s. So, he is an exception, but I've seen some more modern exceptions, people that are contemporaries to me, I graduated with or around the same time, that ended up getting a position straight out without a master's and ended up in a structural group. And I'm not sure if they went back for a master's, but they were hired straight out of school with an undergrad. But that is very rare. And as for me, I didn't even test the waters as an undergrad. I just went straight to grad school because I knew I wanted to learn more, and I felt like I needed to expand my structural toolbox, if you call that. Some structural engineers use that term. So I wanted just to make sure I expanded my knowledge and knew a lot more about structural engineering before putting myself in the work field. let's say I would add this tidbit for civil engineering students that are still undecided whether they want to do structural engineering or not. While your structural classes may be real, like the harder ones, everyone always tells me, "Oh, I hated structures; they were the hardest ones." I mean, that's just the theory and stuff. Like in when you're actually working as a day-to-day structural engineer, you're not going to be doing complex calculations all the time. You need to be able to understand them, but don't shut out the option of pursuing or looking into structural engineering just because one or two classes are really hard. You know, now mind you, you would have to go to if you want to be a structural engineer, I highly recommend you take more structural classes. But if you took your structures one class and you didn't get a good grade, but you really like the material and maybe you didn't get a chance to really dive deep into some of the topics covered into it, it may still be for you. Don't be put off by not getting an A on your first structural class. In my experience, I work with a lot of people. Um, my company is one of the largest companies in the industry that we work in. Um, one of the leading firms in this field, and over the years they've been expanding. They've been buying out smaller firms. That's how they've grown to have more local presence, and more so the local firms were like more mom and pop, a few engineers here, a few engineers there. So they're expanded over time, such that our client network goes throughout the entire country. You know, Starting with the local municipalities. So um, as they have built and added, before it was like more civil and environmental engineers, and as they've grown, they started hiring structural engineers instead of subbing that work out. um, we ended up being able to do everything in house. So, I mean, it wouldn't really be different if we were a smaller firm because we still had to communicate with outside sources, outside subs or primes that we're working with, prime consultants. But at the end of the day, this job does require a lot of coordination and communication. So there are a lot of people I have to come across for any particular project I'm working on. Um, However, there are cases where some structural engineers are working solo. They have their own firm. They do their own work. They do some contract work, um, and they only really, they also have to coordinate depending on the type of work that they're doing. Um, but they like working alone. They choose to be able to work more on a solitary basis. But they can't get out of phone calls. They still have to meet deadlines and talk to a project manager or tell the architect, hey, you can't put this column here. Um, so long story short, yeah, eventually they will have to coordinate and talk to a few people. Yes, basically every job I've worked with, I tend to see myself as a shy person, not necessarily a big people person. My brain works very technical, in a very technical manner. Um, and, I've had to, it's interesting because as a younger person, a younger aspiring engineer, I was very shy and very insecure about being able to talk to people of authority, people of, especially in the engineering field where would be trying to find a job. Um, so over time, um, I'll give you an example. As you may be aware, I took a year off of school and was a teacher for a year in the South Pacific. Um, I was a volunteer teacher for a year, taught sixth grade, and at first I thought that that was just something I was doing good for something good I was doing for the people in need at the time, the students and their parents and the island. But um, at the end of it all, I realized how much I had grown as a person, as an individual, not only in an emotional and spiritual way that one may grow, a maturity level, but primarily with my people skills, being able to have more confidence, um, to interact not only with younger people that are depending on me to tell them what to do or to guide them, but also with older people of authority, and and meeting deadlines, or that kind of stuff. That there's other jobs that I've picked up, or that I had over the years as a student in college, but I think that was one of the main turning points in my individual career as a growing and aspiring engineer, that really helped me solidify, or just get on the right track as far as developing my people skills and my confidence in myself. But there was other jobs too. I was able. I think something that really helped me and really got me out of my shell was becoming a TA, a teaching assistant, while I was in undergrad and also in grad school. I was responsible for teaching labs to younger or mid-level, mid like upperclassmen too, I guess, um, engineering students. And you're dealing with these students that are close to your age, and basically your peers, but you have to guide them and tell them what they have to do. You have to grade their papers, and overall, that taught me, that it improved my sense of responsibility, and just how to work with people, and how to start gauging personalities. And you're not going to make everyone happy. There's always someone that's not going to like what you're doing, or your decision, or you graded their paper a little extra harsh in their in their perspective. So definitely, I feel that every position I've had, whether it was a summer internship, or but primarily the teaching positions that I've held, um, have really helped me grow as a person. And I could definitely see that showing up as in my personality and my skills, of what I have to do, what I use here, on my day-to-day job. I used to like putting people in categories where I was like, all right, I'm a structural engineer, so I'm good at math, and I'm meticulous, and I'm very organized, and I'm gonna be very careful of giving everything just right. But then I realized, going into the field, that there's other engineers that are also good at math, but they're not as meticulous, and they're still really good engineers. It's not like, you know, at the end of the day, you have to balance out what is good. What is the whole point of this job I'm working on? Is it to get 100%, like a test score of 100%, or is it just to get the best product to the client in an efficient and cost effective way? Um, so I learned I had to let go. I've had to start letting go a little bit of. I'm not saying don't provide quality work. I'm actually a very big fan of providing quality, and the aspect of quality, something I'm involved in with my company, as far as helping other engineers and project managers, um, include and make sure they're considering quality throughout the process of the project. Um, so I can't say anymore that I think that there's something that you absolutely need. But if I had a suggestion as to things that, or characteristics that we want to develop and encourage for structural engineers, yes, you have to be good at math, but it's definitely not the kind of math that, you know, that is like so complicated that you're learning in differential equations and algebra, and not algebra, or calculus 2 and 3 in college. Those are kind of weed out classes. You're going to be using just very basic math, but and it just math and logic to the basic, very basic level. That's what you have to be good at. Just basic math and logic. And as I mentioned before, most of my job is communication. Um, Being able to hold a conversation, approach people, tell them what you want, tell them if you disagree in a cordial way, in a non-confrontational way, that you don't want to sever those ties. Um, and I know engineers are not going to like this, and um, to hear, not, I'm not going to say most engineers, because I have met enough engineers that are very much, well, people person, and they love working with people, talking and interacting. They're not, definitely not on the very technical side of things in the field. I mean, structural engineers have to be technical, um, but basically develop your people skills, be able to grow your emotional intelligence, when you're dealing with people, and you realize that everyone is different, everyone has a different perspective, and if something doesn't make sense to you, it might make sense to them, and it may not be wrong. It just may be a different perspective. um, so in general, yes, those are the some things, but I would say that that would be helpful for all engineers in general, not just structural engineers. Yes, the equipment that we're required to be able to learn is a laptop or a PC computer, and basically learn how to use Microsoft Office or whatever email service you're using. In addition to that, all the Word and Excel, um, and then all the different software that your company requires. So definitely the equipment would be more of the computer base, what you're doing on the day-to-day basis. When you're not communicating, you're doing the analysis, or you're trying to figure something out, or trying to do some research as to why something failed. So you're constantly on your computer. So being able to develop your computer skills is definitely essential. And you don't have to be a crazy programmer, like crazy smart programmer to be able to do this. But some in grad school, some structural engineers or even undergrad, some may realize that some basic programming skills would be good, because as you start diving into a specific problem, sometimes it does require a little bit of programming to make your own life easier when you're doing some analysis. But definitely not. We're not required to be some really big time expert programmers. Now, as far as what we think about from construction side equipment, do we need to know how to drive tractors and that kind of stuff? No, that's what the contractor pays their subcontractors to do. They're the ones that are going to come in and drive all the heavy machinery. For me, in particular, when I'm in the field or I have to go there, I have to wear my safety, my PPE, my safety equipment, my hard hat, my construction vest, um, boots. Definitely, you want to, especially if you're on an active construction site, you definitely want to have steel toe or composite toe boots. But for the most part, I'm just walking around taking pictures, just seeing what the damage is, or if we're not at a construction site, but we're doing an inspection or a visual assessment of something that's a structure. Let's say in this case it's a clear well for a water treatment plant, where they store the water before they've already treated the water, put chemicals in it, they clean it, and then they send it out for us to use here at our homes, right? The tap water. So those tanks in there, over time, they get old. The lining systems inside, the coating systems that protect the concrete from water intrusion or the chemicals of the water, so those have their wear and tear. So we have to go in there and or we have special divers sometimes go in there and take pictures, and then we look at those pictures, and we analyze what we do there. So besides in that case, we have other people have the specialty equipment, a dive team, and there could be structural engineers in that very specific niche of a profession that do that. But for the most part, I mean, I do have to get into some tight spaces. I'm not in a dive suit. Typically, we have those cleared out, and if anything, I have a little hammer and a little wire brush where we're trying to see how badly the surface of our concrete is deteriorating, or if it sounds like, if it's we have a special way of determining if it's like a solid wall of concrete, or if you could tell that the deterioration is getting deep in there, and it sounds a little hollow. So besides that, we don't really, in my particular field, we don't have the need for a lot of specialty tools besides just basic construction tools, and um, primarily our computer for our day to day. It does. It doesn't require a lot of travel, just travel. I was just at a site visit in Miami for 2, 3 days last week. I live in Orlando, Florida, and they have me driving down to South Florida quite a bit, but quite a bit could range anywhere from twice a month to once every 6 months type of thing. So it really depends on the projects I have on my plate, and the workload and what each requires. So yeah, I mean, I've been for work. I've been up to Tennessee a few times. Trying to think of other out of state places I've been. Um, but primarily Tennessee is where I've done my work. We do work all the way in the south, all in the southeast. So our structural group covers jobs anywhere from Tennessee, the Carolinas, all the way down to South Florida, and we also do some federal stuff. So one of my coworkers, one of the projects she got assigned to, is actually doing work. I forget the exact client, but we do work for our Air Force and the Civil Corps of Engineers and some other federal type entities that assist other countries' equivalent entities um, build, Air Force bases, or so we've done Air Force bases in Saudi Arabia. We've done some work in Israel and that kind of stuff, and then Europe too. So my coworker has gone to Europe a couple times, um, so that's been fun for her. For me, I've done more local travel, and she does local travel too. But the opportunities she's gotten could take her literally to Europe or other parts of the world. And I know there are opportunities out there, but I would basically have to be on assignment for a few years, and kind of leave my group temporarily for anywhere from a few months to a couple of years. Those opportunities are always there, but my day-to-day responsibilities only require a minor travel. Okay, advantages. Um, I'll be honest. When I was in school, there was even in high school, one of my science teachers took us to a wastewater treatment plant, um, and I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd be working in the industry that literally designs those structures or those processes that treat our water. I was really put off by the smell, so that's a disadvantage when you go to a wastewater treatment plant or any other waste process plant that we could do with. We also do recycling uh, facilities. Um, so not only water and wastewater, but just waste in general. Um, is the smell? Yeah. So the smell. You're around uh, solids or semi-solids that are not necessarily good for your health. So you have to make sure you're taking the precautions when you're in those vicinities, making sure you're wearing masks and eye protection, in addition to the normal PPE that you have to wear. But I mean, someone's got to do the job, right? So that leads into the huge advantage of being in an industry that there's always demand. There's always demand for the work. I'm not going to say that our company has never gone through, a tough time where just the work has not been as ever flowing as it usually is. Usually the work is just coming in constantly. We have very good, um, project managers and client service leaders that have very good relationships with their clients and make sure that we're getting the work. Um, but there's times it's just the industry in general just has gone down, and there's been at least one, you know, period where we had to lay people off across the company just because the work was drying up. There was a lot of, senior level people with, pretty big salaries, not, and there was no work for them, so that was tough. But that's the exception, because that I've only seen that once since I started working here, and they were like, people around me were telling me that has never really happened. That's not a thing. Maybe a group is doing bad as far as workload, but like the company in general, like the industry, that's very rare. So I would say that it's an advantage, job security. When I first graduated and I went out, it wasn't a hiring market. So a lot of, I graduated grad school with a lot of bright people as my contemporaries, and they were finding jobs here. I wouldn't say it was left and right. Some took them a little longer to find a job, even with a master's degree. But I mean, if you look hard enough and long enough, you have your options open. You could go, anywhere. It may not be your ideal job, but I would say job security in my industry is definitely something that should not be overlooked. Um, And another advantage is just kind of, I mean, just more of a giving you a world perspective of how our infrastructure is. Um, well, I'll say world perspective, just in general for the world, the need for water, the need for clean water in developing nations, something you don't really think about. And even the need for clean water in our own country, in some areas that have been forgotten. Um, as far as local governments go, the poorer areas, they don't get the best water treatment. They get, we know what happened in Flint, Michigan. Um, so just being aware of, how important how this thing that we call water that we literally need to survive is, and how much we take it for granted by just opening the water and just letting it run when we're washing dishes or just about to shower, let it warm up for about 5 minutes, and just being able to be more conscientious of, yeah, you could afford to pay the water bill, but as a world, can we afford to be wasteful? Not really. Um, and yeah, how about our infrastructure? Is how much more engineers we need in our industry if our government's willing to pay for it to be able to update our infrastructure. Um, the American Society of Civil Engineers graded us, I think we were in the D. We might have gone up to a C as far as the American infrastructure for water, wastewater, and obviously there's other infrastructure. But for the American Society of Engineers to be labeling it that low compared to other parts of the world, that has to tell you something that um, there's a huge need out here for engineers, not just structural engineers. I'm talking about environmental engineers, people working in an industry. But obviously, there has to be the money, and the funding for it, and that those are more political conversations. Um, but a disadvantage, let's think of more. Just, I mean, I wouldn't say there's any disadvantages besides it's more of a joke. The smell when you go to a wastewater treatment plant. When you go to water treatment plants, you don't deal with those smells. My last project in Miami just last week, we're dealing with stormwater pump stations. So they're not treatment plants, but they're pump stations that are throughout the whole city that deal with the stormwater that goes to the gutters. And basically, they've had some flooding issues down south. So they're trying to make sure that the city doesn't get flooded when, during a hurricane or a high rain event. So that these pump stations, that the pumps at these pump stations are powerful enough, and the piping, the infrastructure is adequate to be able to just pump and suck all that water out, so that the residents are not, in a foot or two of water. Um, so yeah, there's different types of things we could do, and you're not always dealing with the wastewater smells. Another advantage is, yeah, like I said, I personally haven't traveled internationally for my job, but there are opportunities in the company for that. I could put my name in the hat for some of those, and is the travel and exposure. You a lot of times, in school, as students, we're like, we basically have to meet certain criteria that's been laid out for us in order to graduate. There's not a lot of room for flexibility as to what you need to do in order to get your career. You have flexibility as to adding a minor or another major, or where you go to school. But once you're there, there's a certain curriculum. Once you start your career, there's no curriculum set in front of you. It's really up to what you want to do. If you sit there and just wait for things to come to you, sometimes that works out for some people. Some people have the relationships, and or just lucky enough to be at the right place at the right time. But in general, it's really up to you as an individual to be a go-getter and be able to know what you want, brainstorm and see what direction you want to take your career in. Um, and yeah, I mean, that goes in that could go for any industry, not just the industry I work in, or my specific field. Um, but I can't really think of many disadvantages. A lot of advantages of working in this field, but the primary one that a lot of people wouldn't think about, and like I said, when I was an aspiring structural engineer, I had no idea that I was going to work in the water and wastewater industry. You know, going on site visits here in Miami, like really sweaty in the sun, just looking at some what some would consider some boring pump stations. But now to me, this is exciting. Like, oh, I'm learning more. Like, I see the bigger picture. You know, I have friends that are working designing skyscrapers, and they send me pictures of like the beautiful buildings they did, and um, it that's nice and gratifying. I personally wanted to do that when I was interviewing for jobs, and I had a few of those opportunities, but I had to make a decision where I wanted to work. And starting out, when I was comparing apples and oranges, staying here in Florida and working for a company like this with the job security and the pay was actually, comparatively speaking, a little more than what the fancy firms that were doing skyscrapers were giving me, and the job security was definitely better, staying in this type of industry. So I made a decision, like, do I want a fancy job where my friends will be really impressed with the building I designed, or will I go somewhere where, I'm kind of doing something, positive for the world, but also ensuring my job security. So it's just something to consider, from my experience. Do we make a healthy financial living? Yes. Is it, livable? Yes. Um, when I was in school, and when just society in general seems to think, um, like, what is good money? So when you think good money, my brain, I don't know if everyone else, my brain goes to doctor money, or a successful lawyer money, a successful, maybe not on the, public side, but someone that is working for a hotshot firm, and hotshot clients, that type of thing. So we're definitely not on that level. Uh, does that mean that's not good money? No. I mean, it's definitely something that in general, I can't speak to for the other engineering disciplines. All I know is that if you're trying to decide which career you're going to go into just based on the money, that's good. I respect that decision. And if you want to do that, then I think, don't quote me on this, but I think chemical engineering and electrical engineering is typically where the higher paying out of school jobs are. I think, as you progress, you get paid more and more. So it goes, it progresses to, and in structural engineering, it depends on which market which industry you're working in, what state you're working in. But like I said, when I started out and I was comparing the different job offers, um, I was actually impressed with how much they were paying me here in Florida. Florida has no state income tax, and they have very low. Well, not maybe not so much anymore now, since everyone's moving down to Florida. Like, house prices have skyrocketed. But tradition, historically speaking, at least in the recent history, Florida has been a low income. Not a low income. What's the word? Uh, Cost of living is not very high compared to other states. So if I take my salary that I started out in Florida, like, based on what my take home was and what I could afford to buy after all the bills were paid, including a little bit of student loans I had from undergrad, very minor. It was definitely a good salary for a single out of school person. Um, if I would have had that same salary in the state of California or New York, then I would have had to get creative. It's definitely doable because, just sharing my experience, I'll be candid. I was considering, was it 2 or 3 job offers when I decided to take this one, and one of the job offers was designing skyscrapers. Immediately starting into design of a skyscraper they were designing, going to build up in Manhattan. The starting salary was identical, between the job offer I had from New York, working in Manhattan, then living here in Orlando and working as a structural engineer. Same background. I've had a master's. They both required a master's in structural engineering, but the pay was identical. So, I mean, I can't say for that industry once you start how fast they increased your salary. And in my industry, I've had to, it seems like, unfortunately, and I hate to say this, but because I don't like that it's this way, but it seems like, especially in the hiring market. So our market in for at least engineering, at least structural engineering, but in general, like the water wastewater field, there's a lot of it's a hiring market right now. It wasn't a hiring market where I started. So there's a lot of people out there looking to fill positions. There's a lot, there's more and more work, and less and less people that are trying to, jump jobs. So there is a very good opportunity to boost your salary quite a bit by just jumping around in different firms. And this is something I haven't done. I'm still at the same place I started, but I've had peers that have left this company, are making, they're jumping salary ranges way faster than they would have if they would have stayed at this firm. And that might be the same in other companies, other industries too. The best way to make money fast is to, be good at what you do, make good relationships, and boom, once another opportunity comes through, jump to the next one. That might be a little bit more information on what the question, the original question was, but I want the reader, the viewers to be aware that this is something that's out there. And I personally, if you're going down that mindset that you could do that, there's nothing wrong with that. At the end of the day, you have to do what's good for you and your family, but make sure you're looking at the whole picture. Make sure you're looking at, are the people you're going to work with this, the same people that, is it going to be a better situation on the current when you're in? I'm in a great situation, have amazing coworkers, and I'm more loyal. I've been more, I can't say I've been loyal to my firm, you know, but the main reason for that is the people I'm working with and the support I have and the flexibility that I've had and the trust that they've given me. That has outweighed, other higher salary offers. Um, and and besides that, like, a huge component of that is the benefits. um, you may not think about that coming straight out of school because you may have been on your parents' insurance, health insurance, if they had some, but benefits is a huge thing that a lot of people don't think about. One thing, okay, everyone's going to give you medical insurance and dental insurance, but how good is it? How much do you have to pay out of pocket? How many vacation days do you have? That's a big thing for me, having enough time to take off of work so I could refresh and be with my family and friends and travel, things that, are important to me. So when I compared everything, side to side, the decision always has been to stay at my firm. Um, but in general, yes, engineers make good money. It's not, it's definitely not on the level of doctor money. Um, Especially when you start out, it seems to be that some of the salaries seem to be a little lower. But if you're a good engineer and you're a go-getter and people see that you're bringing value to the team and to the project and to the company, ultimately you're making the company money. Are you spending your time doing project work, quality project work, or are you spending your time, you're just waiting for things to fall your way? People are going to start noticing that. And more than likely, the person that's a go-getter, that's actually questioned, that when you run out of work, you make work for yourself, or you make work that you're learning, you grow yourself into training courses or something that, will add value to your skill set, to you, through your skill set, and ultimately to the company. So an example I'll give: my wife is not a structural engineer. She is an environmental engineer, and she's more of a people person, right? So she's FaceTime with clients, FaceTime with contractors, constantly coordinating meetings and that kind of stuff. Obviously, she has to be good at math, but her career path has gone more along the lines of interacting with people and coordinating with all sorts of different entities within the industry, or within the the players of the of particular projects. And based on the work she did, the connections she made, and the people that were directly above her, she was able to more than double her salary 6 to 8 years of her working. um, I don't know, other fields may have that. I don't know, I can't speak to like the standard that I set, like the doctor and lawyer range. We're nowhere near that. But essentially, like, even if you start out with even if you're not too happy with where you started as a entry level civil or structural engineer, um, the opportunities for you to like make big jumps will always be there. And that's something I was all I just had no idea about when I first started. I saw some firms and some smaller firms in some small cities, and I would see some starting salaries. I was like, man, I don't want to work there. I mean, I'm sorry, but that pay is really low compared to what I expect of a person with a master's. Unfortunately, I was able to find something that was more up to the standard that I wanted. And then I realized that there are opportunities to jump, in your salary. If you really want to make sure you get paid more and you're happy, then there are those opportunities that you can make within your own firm, but also, outside of the firm. I'm sure there are. I mean, the stigma from the outsider looking into the engineering world is, and I wouldn't say this is a negative thing. This is more of a, like in a joking way. It's, oh, you're an engineer, you must be really smart. Oh, you're an engineer, you must make a lot of money. Those two things could be true, but or you must be really good at math or something. Like that's good. Obviously, you have to be, at least good at basic math. Um, but within the industry, I would say, uh, yeah, there's always some tension between different parties. Tensions are presuppositions or just generalizations that people make. So, for instance, like on the engineering side, there's always some back and forth between, or just some butting heads sometimes with contractors. We have some great contractors out there, but there's some contractors out there that don't do the best job. And at the end of the day, it happens. That happens in any industry. Um, but sometimes, there's that back and forth, like, oh, the contractor messed it up again. From the contractor perspective, the engineer, can be too demanding, or, oh, this engineer is too conservative. Do we really need to do all this? Like, so, sometimes it's like, oh, like I've heard a lot of contractors say that, structural engineers are, especially in our field, are just being too conservative. So we're putting really big factors of safety on our designs that, to give someone perspective, if let's say we're designing a foundation for a column in a building, right? Let's say the foundation is going to be a square column and we say it needs to be 8 feet by 8 feet in plan, by like a foot thick. Some contractors, based on their experience, are like, I just did this down the road, and that column was 6 foot by 6 foot. So this engineer is being really conservative, or really, their factors of safety are too high. And sometimes there's that disconnect. The contractors gauge based on things that they've done, but they may not know the whole picture. They don't know that the codes that we're using are different from that building to this one, or in this case, would be from, you're building a foundation for a certain type of structure, but over here we're building a tank, not a building. So whatever other foundations we have here are under different codes. So yeah, there's always that. I wouldn't say it's a stigma, but there's always those sentiments between engineers and contractors that, that contractors are not really necessarily, obviously they're contractors. They're not thinking like engineers. They're trying to get the work done, and then engineers have a certain view on them, and then they have a certain view on us. But in my perspective, we just have to, we have to work together, and we have to, mistakes are going to be made on both sides, and they have happened historically both sides. Everyone blames everyone, and then client stuck in the middle, like, all right, who's going to pay for this? And the engineer's like, oh, I designed it right. The contractor built it wrong. The contractor said they built it right, or they built it, they built it right, but it was the engineer for not making it too clear in the drawing. So there's that kind of stuff. But in general, for structural engineering, is there any like, any stigma, a big stigma? I wouldn't say there is, but they're the little idiosyncrasies within, the people that work within the industry. And it doesn't, it's probably the same in other industries, with the different players or they're involved in the project. But when you go to school and you go to grad school, you realize how smart some people are around you. And you're like, man, we could do the same things, but these people are in other levels. But it's a matter of applying yourself, um, and just really working hard at it. And essentially, you could do anything, even if you're not the smartest kid in the class. Um, I would say what I love about what I do is the more and more I work in it, maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid since I work in this industry, but I like the fact that the work I'm doing is, one, it's intellectually satisfying to me because I love, being able to solve a problem, be presented with a problem, and use the knowledge I've learned in school, the knowledge I've learned as a structural engineer, as a young structural engineer, growing and getting experience within our industry. I'm able to apply all of that to solve a problem. To solve a problem that, yeah, we're doing it for a client, which may be the county of X county here in Florida or in Tennessee or Georgia. Um, but at the end of the day, the end user is going to be the taxpayer, the person that, uh, the regular people. So in my perspective, I'm doing something. I'm working in a job that's basically benefiting the everyday American, the everyday person. Um, and I wish that, and there's opportunities out there, and maybe one day I could do that in a sense, in a place where not just the average American, but also, in places and communities that are in dire need, like third world countries. And there's organizations that do that kind of work, and um, but in general, for me, it's that to be able to use my skills in a way that's intellectually satisfying, but also in a way that's helping, society, um, at large. So, but in my perspective, before I jump into that, I want to say that almost any job that I've realized that almost any job or any profession that one takes, unless there's specific things that just make those a little different, but it seems like wherever you go, you're going to have a lot of stress, and you're going to have your responsibilities, especially if you take your job seriously or it's a very high demanding job. There's always going to be the stress aspect to it. So one thing that I'm not, that I wish was different, but you just kind of have to find ways to deal with it, and there are ways to deal with it. Is the stress level, because once you get to a certain point that you have certain responsibilities, I'm not particularly a manager of people, but there's people in my age group that are, or even younger that are managing people. Basically, there's always the danger of burnout, and I'm not saying this is only for structural engineers, just in the consulting world itself. So this is not really exclusive to our industry, but just if you're working in a consulting role, um, ultimately, what's the main goal? You're trying to provide services or consulting services, design services, whatever it is, to your clients. And you have several clients. You have to please all of them. You have to be able to win future work. You want to impress them. So being able to provide quality work in a timely manner within budget, and then deal with all the problems. There always will be problems. As easy as a project may seem at the beginning, there always will be things that come up during the project that, just throw a curveball in there, and you have to get creative. So just dealing with all the moving parts and not letting it stress you out, that's something that I would say I would recommend, because yes, it does get stressful. It does, in this type of industry, it could take a toll on us. And the best thing I would say is just to be able to learn how to deal with your mental health and be able to take care of yourself, and to draw, boundaries where you need to draw them. But I would say that would be, if not, yeah, I would say that'd be the only thing I would say is a disadvantage of working in this industry. Just the consulting life. Ultimately, it's all about money. And school is all about getting 100% or closest to an A as you can, or a decent GPA to, get a good job. But in this, like, quality is providing quality work is good, but sometimes quality and and someone quality sometimes gets sacrificed, and also our personal health, physical and mental health could get sacrificed because of just being so swamped with so much work and so much responsibilities, and you're trying to impress everyone, especially as a younger and mid-level engineer. I think I'm considered mid-level at my company, borderline senior. So at this point, I have a lot of responsibilities, and like based on how my work goes, that will determine how future will get assigned to me, or how future project managers will want, if they will want to work with me still. So there's always that stress of making sure you do a good job, but that can take a toll on your own health. So don't let it get to that point. And that's why it comes down to why we're doing this interview. And I really like that these interviews are being done and we're talking to different people. I just wish I would have known the different kinds of industries and the different how it all kind of connects, and kind of opportunities that I could have pursued, straight out of school. We have those type of resources and universities that, kind of guide us, and maybe I missed some of that in school. Like maybe I just didn't read enough of what was available through the university's websites about potentially how many different paths we could go. But for me specifically, I wish someone would have been able to break down what kind of industries are out there, and and like I'm happy in the industry I am, but I had no idea anything about this until I actually applied for the firm and realized, okay, like this is somewhere I could consider myself working, as I was researching the company and seeing the type of work that they did. But before I started applying, I wish I could have had more exposure, because I sometimes I am intrigued with, there's people that work in the forensics world, um, basically always investigating failures or things that happen. And it's structural engineering, but it's totally different to what I do now. They're not doing they're not designing new buildings or new structures. They're basically doing investigations and working with lawyers and doing different things. So I've always been intrigued about that. I'm not saying I'm thinking of a career jump at all, but you know, I would have known about that until I learned it through word of mouth, you know, in the industry, and I kind of knew a little bit about that, like when I was finishing grad school, but I didn't know it in depth to even look into it as a potential career path. So I would say, if you're an aspiring structural engineering student, do your research. Yeah, you may have had internships before that, so you know about the building side and the transportation side. So you could either go buildings or bridges. That's typically where your mind goes when which industry you want to go into. But there's so many other types of industries and opportunity out there for structural engineers. Um, so ultimately it comes down to if there's no website online that kind of breaks this all down for you, then just continue networking and expanding your network to be able to just learn through the different people that you come across. One of the major perks that I really liked about my firm, especially when I was starting, was that there was no expectation. Like, we had a lot of work, but we had a big enough team and enough staff to be able to do the work, and most of us just worked regular 40-hour weeks. Which, when I was in grad school and talking to colleagues that had already been hired, or that were just getting hired and just starting their careers, um, and soon after I graduated, other people got jobs, and I took some time off for travel. But I would hear all these things about them having to work 50 to 60-hour work weeks starting out, and I had no gauge as to like how that would apply in the long term. But fortunately, I was able to find a really good work-life balance in my early career. Um, in the recent years, it has been a little harder, but I'd say it was more very specific to the situation in my group. We lost some senior leadership, some retired, some moved to other roles. So I guess I was forced a little bit. Well, I was not forced by anyone, but I had to step up and take a lot more responsibility than I was used to very fast. Um, so since I took my job seriously, I had to put a lot of effort and time into that transition over the last couple of years. And yeah, there's sometimes where we have deadlines, and I'm working till late hours in the night because there's just not enough time in the day. And sometimes two different clients want their project submitted on the same day, and you can't tell one client, hey, you're not your competitor, but this other person that's also paying me, that's has something that they want the same day. No, that's irrelevant to them. Um, so yeah, things can be a little bit difficult sometimes, especially when you're busy. But um, in general, the work-life balance is good. It really is a mixture of what you decide, where you decide to draw your lines, and making sure, and also the project itself. There will be times where you're like, this is so demanding. There's so much to do. There's not enough time. But for the most part, a 40-hour work week is what we do. And it also is a skill to be able to control your own time. And that's something, even as a 8.5 year in structural engineer, I'm still learning to do, is to be able to control my time, where to draw the line of when I start work, where I draw the line where I stop work, and provide and shifting that time to what's really important, which is your family, and, the people that care about you. Just to basically do your research as to what is really out there. I know some of you may just be wanting to get a job, whichever job. Once you're about to graduate and you're just worried, you need to start working right away. You may be getting married soon. That costs money. Um, and so your situation might be different, but if you have a little flexibility, just make sure you start researching, and the type of firms that you're working with, who their competitors are, what industry they work in, and what other industries are out there. Also, one thing I would say is, like, you may, like, honestly, this is something that was like at the very end of my list of things to learn about a company. Is the benefits was something that wasn't really at the top of my list. I wanted just whatever highest salary I could get, and whatever highest take home income I could get, when I first started. Um, but it's sometimes not really about the money. Like, I know it sounds so cliche to say that, but um, it really comes down to the whole package. Who are you working with, and where? What's the office culture? Does your company's employees, what's the retention rate? Um, is it employee owned? Are people happy working there? Um, and and obviously the the benefits package, having good health insurance. But for me, the best thing for me was the time off. I love to travel, so having as much days off as I possibly can is a plus for me, because I want to do a good job. In order to do a good job, I want to feel fulfilled. I want to have a balance in my life, and traveling is something that I use to add that balance to my life. So yeah, the ultimately just make sure you have the full picture. And even if it's a company that you think that you may not end up working with, like, I mean, you may end up realizing that, hey, this is somewhere that may be worth looking into.